Welcome to Onalytica's Influencer interview series. I'm delighted today to be joined by Brian Solis. A very warm welcome to you. Thanks for being on our interview series. And Brian is an independent digital analyst and a digital anthropologist. I'm very glad that I was able to say that correctly. So, Brian, I'm sure that our audience would love to know what you're currently focusing on now. And I know you've got a lot of research projects and you've just written a book. So please, tell us what you're up to.
Yeah, it's a process of reinvention of sorts. So being an independent analyst and anthropologist, my work is focused on key trends that are affecting markets. And I do so by studying technology trends, but also how those trends are affecting behaviors in markets and in particular contexts. So for example, as customers, as employees, for example, I completed a project recently that studied the effects of social media, Instagram, Snapchat, on a woman's definition of beauty and how that affects her self-esteem and her competence, and sort of played that out over time as it was for a beauty brand, so that they could better understand where to add value in someone's life, rather than, so for example, in the comparison economy, where we're constantly looking at how we compare ourselves to others, and unchecked, those types of behaviors can become, let's just say, unproductive in a nice way. But those types of experiments, or then something more traditional of, what's the future of digital transformation, or what's corporate innovation? How is technology helping businesses that are more traditional in nature compete against digital natives and up and coming startups? So really looking at a much more dynamic view to help executive audiences or B2B audiences make decisions about how to lead the way for the future.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. How do you split your time between say a more executive audience and then talking about the sort of human behaviors and work-life balance?
Wow. Okay. So the work-life balance part, I'll get to that in a minute, because that's an ongoing pursuit, personally and professionally. The business audience and the human aspect of technology, I call it digital Darwinism, right? So markets evolve, technologies evolve, and it's a choice about where we are in that evolution. So what I try to do, especially being here in Silicon Valley, is break away that conversation from just technology. It's very easy to get caught up in technology. I mean, if you look at, say, the social media landscape right now, everybody's talking about Instagram and likes, or the need to be on TikTok, and what's next in terms of Apple and augmented reality. Are we still going to have our phones? Yet we have a folding Motorola Razr that's out now and kind of giving us examples of new form factors. Those things are all important, but also the effects of how we as customers or employees or as human beings, how we react to that as a society, as a market. Those are the trends that are the leading indicators for businesses to make decisions on moving forward. So what I try to do is bring the humanity into the discussion about technology so that we can make more informed decisions about leading those trends. And I got to tell you, it's harder. It's easier said than done, probably a way to say that. And by that, I mean, it's natural to get caught up in the shiny object syndrome. It's especially when you look at influencers. Everybody's trying to be the influencer of whatever key trend is going on. So they'll add strategic hashtags to anything that they're posting. They'll share news stories and reports published by companies just so that they could get those hashtags in their tweets or their posts, so that then when those reports come out, they're linked to that conversation.
Sure. I completely understand what you're saying. Obviously, as an influence marketing company, then we're watching out for that all the time. And I completely agree with you. So when you're applying your research, who do you think most benefits from it? You talked about the brands needing to look at the changing behaviors of consumers. Do you work mainly directly with brands? Are you hired as an influencer per se by lots of brands? I mean, what's the engagement model for you?
Well, one of the things that is important to understand is that you have to track influencers to be an influencer. And by you, I know you know this because you have you have a pretty awesome platform to do that. Because I say that in regards to, there's much to learn from other influencers as an influencer. And I only call myself an influencer because you sort of kind of get categorized as that based on the topics that you talk about. I learn from influencers in order to also provide, because influencers are also human beings, and they're also they're part of the market evolution. So in a weird way, I learn from what captures their attention. I learn the hashtags that they're using to share that attention and to gain prominence around those topics, so that I can track then how to help executives and also influencers, because a lot of them are my friends, better navigate the market moving forward. So whether you're going to advise an organization on strategy, or whether you're going to be an extension of that brand to their customers, that there are opportunities then to add clarity and value to the markets, not just pushing the trend, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and on that point, so you talked about your network of influencers and listening to them, which I think is a really great attribute. Who are the influencers that influence you, and how do you consume your media?
It depends. There are key topics, of course. So if we're talking about AI or digital transformation, a lot of times you have Tamara McCleary or Daniel Newman who come up. But then at the same time, I still follow analysts who have been in the game for a while, like if it's CRM or cloud transformation, I'll look at folks like Brent Leary or Paul Greenberg. I'll also look at the vendors directly, like Steve Gilmore over at Salesforce, or Val Afshar at Salesforce. So there's a wide swath of different types of influencers. There's influencers who are outsiders. There's influencers who are insiders. There are influencers who are the people who actually track the market traditionally. And then you have this business leader as an influencer that I also track. So I mean, on the Salesforce lineup, you mean, of course, Mark Benioff is somebody who is not necessarily a traditional influencer, but he's certainly an influencer if you
Sure.
look at the word as changing behavior or causing effect. And so it's a wide swath of where I get my information, but it's largely, I like to look at it as peer-to-peer. And then outside of that, of course, I'm reading everything that I can.
Great. And so you're obviously doing a lot of consulting work with brands. Do brands approach you to try and partner with you as an influencer for them to get better thought leadership content, or to help you amplify some of their content already, or speak at their events? Is that the kind of approach that you're getting at the moment?
It's all of the above. Most of the times, I try to advise brands on influencer strategy through my work. So, for example, I published, I think it was the industry's first report on digital influence many years ago, that explored the rise of it, of course, but also breaking it down so that brands could better understand how to partner with influencers. There's popularity, there's authority, and there's a crossover in between. And then also to understand what is it that they're trying to get out of it. I think all too often what I try to advise brands on is to think differently about partnership, where the influencer has their own audience for a reason, right? When they attach themselves to a particular trend, it's done so with intent. And what they're trying to do is not only increase their value and their influence within that particular category, they're also trying to add value to that community as they build it. And so
yeah, absolutely.
Anytime a brand has to partner or wants to partner with an influencer, what they have to think about is what's the value that they're bringing to that influencer, because essentially, beyond just paying them to be an influencer, they're borrowing or they're drafting their social capital, and that social capital is earned. And this is where I try to advise brands, is to understand, not just in working with me, but in working with any influencers, that you have to add value to their community so that you grow together, so that you can then, as a brand, gain social capital beyond just impressions and followers and likes, that you're gaining social capital from a very, very prized audience. The main point, as you cut this down, that I really want to emphasize is how brands need to appreciate the hard work that went into these people building their audiences, so that when they're introducing value, when they're partnering in influencer marketing campaigns, that they're taking into account the hard work that goes into earning social capital, so that they're adding value to allow that influencer to keep and grow that influence within that community, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There's a big transition that the marketplace is going through. There are some brands that are absolutely doing that, and others that are much more transactional and just asking too much from the influencers, and sometimes not even, with any value to the influencer. So it's a mixed bag at the moment. How do you see the marketplace evolving through the brands you speak to, and the kind of maturity of B2B influencer marketing?
Well, I think B2B influencer marketing is probably one of the fastest growing productive segments of influencer marketing. I call it Influence 2.0, because it is this idea of beyond just amplification, or just, to use an old metaphor, top of the funnel, bringing people closer to you. There's an entire customer journey that if you visualize it as an infinite loop, that people are looking for insights at every stage of that journey. So it's not just about, hey, we have this new thing. It's also about, where can we add value to your journey and to your experience? And so I see the B2B marketing influencer marketing landscape as being completely value added. If you look at the B2C side of things, where you have digital native brands that are only marketing through influencers, I see that being muddled quite a bit. And the value just being promotional, and not really even just about social capital. It's really about popularity, and not that it's bad. It's just much, much, much different. And so sometimes I'm on the B2C side of things, but for the most part, the one that inspires me the most, and where I try to be influential back into the brand, and also to marketers and agencies, is to understand that when you're partnering with someone, that word partner couldn't be truer. And so developing not just messages and metrics around that, but looking at where you're trying to focus in that journey, and how that partner can help you bring value, and also give that partner their unique opportunity for voice, not just being on message, it can actually change the game for not just influencer marketing, but marketing in general, because then it's not just about promotion. It's actually about engagement and value creation.
Sure. I think that's absolutely spot on. The outside-in perspectives, focusing on the thought leadership, and shared opinion, and much more authentic and unique content is obviously outperforms all of the transactional promotional stuff. So hopefully that the industry will continue to evolve that way. And even B2C, they're sometimes pushing the sort of thought leadership and social purpose and CSR model, which obviously moves away from the more product advertising play that you were talking about as well. So it'll be fascinating to see how that evolves going forward. Outside of work, I'm fascinated to know what your passions are. I mean, we ask in these series what people's interests and passions are, and you get a lot of really interesting reactions and responses to this. So what do you do when you switch off from all of this consulting and analyst work?
I probably need to have a better answer for that. It's always doing something that is aimed at improving the work-life balance, I suppose. I have a family. I'm trying to be more in the moment and more involved on those fronts. I just published a book that is my first out of 8 books that is not a business book. It explores the effects of digital distractions in our lives, and how it impacts our productivity, our creativity, our happiness, and then how to go on a journey to not just find balance, because it seems so cliche at this, like, what does that even mean? But to actually take control of our relationship with technology, because right now, if you look from an outside-in perspective, I would argue that technology sort of has control over us, and I think this is an opportunity to get in front of this, and then use technology, as you were talking about earlier around B2C influencer marketing, use technology with a purpose in order then to be that source of innovation and motivation for those around us to see how they can improve their lives with technology not being a distraction, but actually being value added.
Great. So you're trying to live what you preach, and I imagine when you're with your family, do you try and encourage your family to switch off their devices and manage their social media consumption, or are they a sort of a law unto themselves in terms of being controlled by technology?
There are a lot of articles that you could read about Bill Gates or Steve Jobs and how other Silicon Valley executives don't allow their children to essentially use the technology that they make and market. So to be honest with you, we're largely, and it was actually not by design even, but we're largely a non-technical social media household.
Great. So you're obviously well known in the social media marketing world and have been at sort of at the forefront of social media. So obviously you're very well equipped to now talk about how to manage this sort of rising social media platforms that obviously are dictating a lot of people's lives. And so yeah, fascinating to see the journey that you've come on there. So your book was out February 2019 this year. It's called Life Scale: How to Lead a More Creative, Productive, and Happy Life.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact launch date. I know that we were able to get books at South by Southwest in March, but I think it's more formal rollout is still happening actually around the world. The book was an exploration of, just long story short, when you brought up earlier about sort of being on the forefront of social media, it was more than just social media marketing. It was actually being part of helping to create the whole social media movement before it was even called social media. And that was a lot of my advisory with many of what would become in the game-changing networks out there, and working with entrepreneurs to help them build those networks and companies, and then also understanding and promoting the idea of what it meant to be social in a digital environment. Something that's not widely known is I actually started studying digital influence in the 90s. So as Web 1.0 was rising, there were discussion boards and groups and websites that were hubs for people that were extremely authoritative on a particular subject that was outside of the traditional media realm. And so these digital influencers were already starting to show what was going to be possible and expanded and amplified and democratized is probably a good word, when Web 2 started to give more and more people access to those types of platforms. And so studying those dynamics as a digital anthropologist of how influence was formed as the web evolved, I could see that with social media itself. I was an optimist. I was a tech apologist of sorts. I wrote the original social media manifesto, I think in 2007, around the promise of what these technologies were going to be able to do for us, not just as marketers, but as human beings, as businesses, as governments. I even wrote a paper for the Department of Defense around Web 2.0 and social media and how it could change the whole dynamics of politics and what we now see is completely the opposite of humanity and community engagement. But the point was that over time, that I once said that with social media comes great responsibility and accountability. And
it sounds like a Spider-Man quote.
It is actually inspired by a Spider-Man quote.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah. The reason is because I could start to see early on how we were changing. We were getting sort of drunk on the attention and the engagement, also the seeming popularity that came with a lot of this. And turns out that a lot of that stuff was by design, and we didn't necessarily have the user manual that said, hey, as a human being, these are the things that are going to happen to you, and here's how to best deal with it as an individual. So it sort of led to a lot of chaos and mayhem that we see now playing out in terms of physical revolutions with this spread of false information or conspiracy theories, or the incredible polarization in politics or any kind of formidable discussions. So I think we kind of went from extreme to extreme, and a lot of that, about especially with life scale, a lot of this was taking a step back and understanding what's happening. What are the design techniques that made that happen within a lot of these social apps and networks? And then as a human being, how to take control of our lives in order to then re-see and reuse a lot of this for a much more productive and meaningful purpose moving forward.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely fascinating to see how you started off in the 90s looking at digital influence, Web 1.0, and then it's come, all the way through to nearly 2020, and you're talking about how to manage social media and also playing the advisory roles on how brands can really influence consumer behavior and human behaviors. So thank you so much for coming on our interview series, Brian. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you, and good luck as an independent analyst in the future.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the time and also any opportunity to kind of hear your thoughts, and also congratulations on all of your success.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thanks, Brian.